mentioned, this Saturday you finally get to see Ohio State in person when they play Minnesota on FS1. When the Buckeyes are at their very best, do they have what it takes to run with Alabama? What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. Listen, Bama right now is on a historic run. I think if they were able to cap this off and go undefeated, we'd be talking about them as one of the great teams in college football history. But that being said, we've seen a lot of great teams in college football history lose football games, whether it was Miami in the early 2000s to Ohio State, Matt Leinert's team in 05 with USC lost to Texas. So this is not a foregone conclusion. You ask about Ohio State. I happen to believe that Ohio State and Clemson are the only two that are uniquely suited to actually get on the field and compete with Alabama. Not saying that they would beat them, but I am saying that they've got elite pass rushers. They've got quarterbacks that can get the ball down the field, maybe expose an Alabama secondary that is depleted right now with some injuries. So, yeah, I think Ohio State's one of the rare teams that could actually compete with Bama.
Joel, do you think Tua, who right now through 6 games has put together not just a great season, but the greatest season statistically in the modern era of college football? You compare him with everybody else who's won the Heisman Trophy. His 6 games to start are better than their 6 games. Can he keep this up, or has he already peaked? How do you see Tua going forward?
Well, he can keep it up because the schedule is so horrendous. That's part of the problem, is that all those quarterbacks in the past played a much more difficult schedule than Tua is having to play against. It's kind of a joke what this schedule has been for Alabama. Now, that's part of the reason why their scoring margin is tops in the country at 40 points per game. They've had over 500 yards in every single game. Tua is incredible. 31 touchdowns and 44 offensive series. I get it, but part of the problem is, for me, Clay, is that can you be considered an all-time great just on the sheer numbers, or do you got to play in fourth quarters of meaningful action? Because let's face it, all he's doing is wearing a baseball hat in the fourth quarter, and can you win the Heisman that way? I'm not so sure, in particular when Haskins is out there throwing 25 touchdowns. Tua's been great. I don't want to take anything away from Tua, but that schedule is horrific, and nobody talks about it. Let's just put it to you this way. A couple of years ago, Washington was playing a really poor schedule. That's all anybody from the SEC would talk about, including you. You could not talk about college football without lamenting Washington's schedule. Now, all of a sudden, mighty Bama has the worst schedule in the country, and you're sitting there like, oh, they're the greatest team since sliced bread, which they might be, but, oh, mum is the word on their schedule for guys like you, huh, Clay?
Wow, class on a tear already.
They are going to go to LSU. They are going to play Mississippi State. They're going to play Auburn, and then they're probably going to play Georgia.
You mean Auburn that can't gain 100 yards on the ground in their last 3 SEC games? Or how about the LSU that's -6 in the turnover margin in their last 3 games with a transfer quarterback that can't play offense out of a wet paper bag? Those powerhouses? Gotcha. Thanks for coming.
Joel, if Alabama goes 15-0 and they win the title, will you shave your head?
No, my head of hair is immaculate.
No, you won't even put your hair on the line.
But I will, like I said, listen, and here's the thing. I can say both things at the same time. Their schedule's horrendous, and if they go, 14, 15-0, Clay, they're going to be considered one of the 3 best teams in the history of the sport, no doubt.
Joel, you seem like you get really heated on this show. Do you have some tension with Clay that I'm maybe
Clay's an SEC homer, so I like to bring those people down a couple of rungs.
Love it. All right, moving on. Texas jumped up 10 spots in the rankings after their huge win over Oklahoma in the Red River Showdown. Joel, can Texas make the playoffs?
I think it's going to be difficult. This is one of those rare years where it's not that we have a ton of undefeated teams, although there's a good number of undefeated teams, but they all are spread out across conferences. So in theory, you could have a lot of undefeated teams as champions, which would leave kind of Texas in the lurch. Plus, when you start to look at the one-loss teams and what they might be from a resume standpoint, it might be difficult for Texas, let's say, if Michigan were to win the Big Ten. It's any number of those scenarios, and Texas might be on the outside looking in as it relates to that Maryland loss. But I will tell you this. Texas is in the driver's seat in the Big 12, and I think it would be a massive upset if they weren't at least in the conference title game come that first week of December.
Joel, you mentioned Texas being a massive favorite. I mean, odds makers have them stalled as a shorter favorite right now. We're followed by Oklahoma, West Virginia, and then TCU kind of in the middle of the pack. Of all those teams, what do you think is the most likely scenario in a Big 12 championship game if Texas gets there? Who would be their most likely opponent?
Well, at this point, you would think that West Virginia, because they don't have a loss in the conference. And here's one of the reasons that, and I don't exactly know what you were talking about the odds, but I will tell you this. Texas, for me, is the favorite to get to the Big 12 championship games for this reason. There are 4 contenders, like you mentioned, and the odds makers would even say so. But of those 4 contenders, Texas is the only one that has a win over any of the other 4 contenders, and they've got 2 of them. The only contender that they have to play that's left on their schedule is West Virginia, and they get them at home November 3rd. So that's why I would say it's a massive upset if Texas were to not be back in Dallas for that Big 12 championship game.
All right, moving on. Oklahoma fired defensive coordinator Mike Stoops after the Sooner gave up 45 points against the Longhorns last weekend. Joel, is this an overreaction by Oklahoma?
Well, I don't think it's an overreaction. I mean, he's got a better track record than Clay does on this show, betting. But I will tell you that Mike Stoops, listen, here's the thing about Mike Stoops. Lincoln Riley, his head coach, has lost 3 games in his career as a head coach. And in those 3 games, they've averaged 41.3 points per game offensively. So, that's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. Plus, in the last 2 losses, they've scored 48 against Georgia, then 45 against Texas, and lost the game. So, at some point, you need a different voice in for the defensive coordinator. And Ruffin McNeill, who he's hired, was the guy that gave him his first coordinating job when Ruffin McNeill was the head coach at East Carolina. They go back a long time. They're very close friends. So Lincoln trusts Ruffin McNeill. This is just part of the hard decisions that you've got to make as a head coach. And quite candidly, he might have even let Mike have a little bit more leeway than most people wanted him to by letting him coach into this season, but it just wasn't working out.
Yeah, but he was a sacrificial lamb for someone has to pay for that Oklahoma loss, and it was him. But my question is, what happens? What is this guy suited to do? Could he be a Trader Joe's clerk? Could he be a Supreme Court justice?
There's nothing wrong with working at Trader Joe's.
The Cowboys head coach, maybe? That'd be great, right? We've had luck with Oklahoma coaches before.
Sal, you want Mike Stoops to be the head coach for Dallas?
Any single body, yeah.
You just want a warm body that is not named Jason Garrett?
Not even that warm. Whatever. Put him on ice. It's fine.
It is interesting. I will tell you this, that if Dallas does make a change, and they were to be looking for coaches, a guy that would be in their top 3 as a candidate would be Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma.
Okay.
He's in the corridor, and if you're looking at college coaches that could potentially go into the National Football League, I think he'll be the top candidate from the college game when teams are looking towards him into the future.
Good. Can he start Sunday?
All right, moving on. The 12th-ranked Michigan Wolverines welcome the 15th-ranked Wisconsin Badgers to Ann Arbor this weekend as 8-point favorites. Joel, who do you like in this one?
I like Michigan, and the reason is there was 2 main questions about Michigan coming into this season: their offensive line and their quarterback play. Everything else we knew was going to be pretty solid, and those 2 areas have played really well, in particular ever since that first quarter against Notre Dame. First of all, that loss does not look that bad now. I think we all can look back and say, boy, Notre Dame is much better than we thought that they were at the time. Then you start looking at the offensive line. Last year, Michigan gave up 2.8 sacks per game. It was one of the worst in the Big Ten. Now, all of a sudden, that's down to 1.3. That's second in the Big Ten. They're playing much better up front. Karan Higdon is 13th in the country running the football. Then the quarterback position. This is the big thing for me. Shea Patterson, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. If he takes care of the football and they can run it, then watch out. This is a team that I think can make a run not only to the East Division title, but potentially the college football playoff and the Big Ten championship because they play great defense. Number 1 total defense in the country, number 1 yards per play defense in the country, number 1 passing defense in the country, and they've got a great head coach regardless of what Clay thinks. And I'm not just taking a shot at Clay.
I think you might be, but it's okay.
I mean, Joel, I agree with you on Michigan in this spot, despite Wisconsin 11-1 straight up and against a number of their last 12 on the road. But have you been as surprised as we have with the way Wisconsin regressed defensively? I know the secondary's banged up, but that defensive line nowhere close to what we've grown accustomed to in Madison over the last handful of seasons.
Yeah, part of what has made them so great, Todd, is their ability to create pressure on the quarterback and the ability to create negative plays for the offense. Well, to do that out of their structure, and the structure that they use is a 3-4. I don't want to get too technical, but basically you've got to have great edge players, the outside linebackers, and they've had a hard time replacing their edge players from the last couple of years. They've had some All-Americans there. One of them was T.J. Watt. You know, they've got some guys that they're trying to replace, and they just haven't found that quality player. They're struggling in the back end in the secondary. That's a defense that has normally done things with a great stable of players, level of players from the defensive line, the second level, and the third level, and they just have not found that concoction with Jim Leonard, their defensive coordinator. I think that's the reason that they're struggling the most.
All right, another big matchup in the SEC this weekend is number 2, Georgia, at number 13, LSU, coming off a loss to Florida. Joel, what does LSU need to do to avoid losing their second game in a row?
Well, again, LSU has not been good offensively. They played well one time offensively, and Joe Burrow played well one time offensively, threw for over 290 yards, ran for over 90 yards, and everyone thought, oh, LSU is back because they played great offense. Well, I mean, one time this season does not, to me, constitute great offense. They're really good on the defensive side of the football. The problem is Georgia's an elite team. They've recruited elite athletes. They've got great quarterback play. Their defense is sound. They can run the football as well as anybody in the country. And they, not anybody else, have the second best average margin of victory in the country at 28.5 points per game. I think this is a walk for Georgia. I don't think LSU is very good. In fact, I think the entire middle of the SEC is very overrated. We saw that last weekend when they all beat up on each other. Rather than just starting to praise everybody, why don't we actually evaluate these teams? And if you evaluate LSU, you will see a team that's great on defense, very average on offense.
Clay's just shaking his
Joel, how much does it pain you when the top 25 comes out and only one conference, the king of college football, has 8 teams in that top 25, the SEC? I think they've done it 14 times. Nobody else in college football at all has ever put 8 in. Joel, be honest. Do you cry yourself to sleep when you see that?
Well, no, I don't cry myself to sleep. I just try to analyze it. And since this is a gambling show, I would think that you would understand that the odds are stacked in their favor. That would be like me walking into a casino and being like, boy, these dealers are so great at blackjack. Even though the odds are stacked in their favor, it's a terrible take. First of all, when you only play 8 conference games, your probability to have more wins than the other conference goes up. And if we know anything, once you get past number 8 in the AP poll, you're ranked based on your record only. So the probability that the SEC is going to get overranked from 8 to 25 is much higher than in any other conference in the country. And you can't tell me the ACC, because they've got the relationship with Notre Dame where they actually play Notre Dame on a consistent basis. So, Clay, the probability is that if you don't have 8 teams ranked in the top 25, you are really bad. So basically, you've been really bad every other time but 14 times in the history of the poll. There you go.
I just had a great idea. I just had a really great idea. If we ever decide to roast Clay Travis, which we totally should, I think that Joel Klatt should host. Are you in for that, Joel?
I'm in for that.
Thank you so much for stopping by.
How about that blackjack dealer? He's so good at blackjack.
All right. Next, the guys will play Make Your Point, which Joel just did, where every topic is aimed at making you some scratch this weekend. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.